the same year that Sesame Street debuted, the same year that I turned 2, a little less than a year before the Stonewall riot, and 2 years after the Compton's cafeteria riot, a lesser known but earlier riot initiated by transgender women and drag queens against police brutality in their community at Compton's cafeteria in the Timberline district in San Francisco. So, all of that, on October 6, 1968, Troy Perry conducted the first service of the Metropolitan Community Church in his home in Los Angeles. Significantly, 12 people showed up to that service. And last week, somebody posted a photo of that first bulletin. Troy Perry had bulletins, y'all, for his very first service. And think about it, you didn't just go type it on a computer and print it off back then. The man had planned. At the top, the bulletin says, "Our first worship service, October 6, 1968, our first." Like he knew there was going to be another. And then before the order of worship, it's written, "Before the service, we speak to God. During the service, God speaks to us. After the service, we speak to each other. Worship in peace. And joy." And joy. Friends, Troy Perry had 12 people show up to a worship service, and God created a whole dang movement and churches on nearly every continent in the world. Amen. From 12 people. See, God doesn't need a megachurch of 1,500 people to get God's work done. God can work miracles with 12 faithful people. And 12 faithful people can change their community and eventually change the world. You might know of some other 12 people, maybe, I don't know, back in the days of Jesus, who did a lot to change the world. And let's look at our passage today. Jesus is passing along the borders of Samaria and Galilee when he encounters these 10 folks with leprosy. Now, there's really nothing between Samaria and Galilee. But what the original hearers of Luke's gospel would have heard in naming those two places was that Jesus was passing between a place that the people were not us, Samaria, to a place where the people were us, Galilee. Because Samaritans and Jews had a history, and it wasn't a good one. And each group thought that the other wasn't worshiping God correctly or in the correct place. There was a lot of history. But then Jesus, in this going from not us to us, encounters this group of people with leprosy, 10 of them, even fewer than those who gathered on October 6, 1968. And yet we find they were pretty powerful too. Because here's the thing. Religious laws said that people with leprosy were not allowed to associate with each other. Not only that, but if someone came near them, they were supposed to cry out, "Unclean, unclean," to make sure that no one came near them and to protect people from their dread disease. See, the worst thing about leprosy was not the skin condition itself, but the stigma associated with it. Religious leaders had decided that this condition was so bad that people needed to be excluded from society. There was no real reason. There was no medical science at the time. They were just these stigmatizing rules. The stigma was worse than the disease. Imagine that. Religious leaders excluding people from community because their disease is stigmatized. You know what I'm referring to. In the 80s and 90s in the U.S., religious people said that we should not research or care for people with AIDS because it was God's way of cleansing the population of undesirable or expendable people. Gay people, drug users, sex workers, Haitian immigrants. Cleansing the population. They said it was God's will. Many of you probably remember that. And right now, monkeypox, MPV, has the government very worried because they're afraid again of stigma and how people, particularly religious people, will treat the people who contract it. Because at the moment, it's spreading most rapidly among men who have sex with men. So, this story about how religious people treat or stigmatize people who may perceive as different, not based on scientific evidence, but on prejudice, it's not over. Am I right? But we have these 10 people with leprosy. They were not supposed to be together, and yet here they were, 10 defiant people with leprosy, and I imagine with an attitude. Because to get together like that when you're not supposed to, I imagine you've got some Oof. 10 people with leprosy who aren't going to let the government or the religious leaders tell them what to do. Because the truth is, when people band together, they have more power than they or the powers that be might have ever thought possible. Just get together. So Jesus encounters these 10 defiant people with leprosy with an attitude, and one of them dares to call out to Jesus. Remember, they're not supposed to be around other people. They're supposed to shout, unclean. But no, this guy, or girl, or person, calls out to Jesus to pay attention to them, to notice them. And the other 9 are probably back there having a nervous breakdown. Like, you can imagine that they had become comfortable with their little group at that point. I mean, oppression, sure, but they were getting to hang out together and nobody had put them in jail yet. So, shut up, don't call attention to our little community here. What are you thinking? But this one wasn't content with just the crumbs of nobody's bothering us. This one yelled out, Jesus, you, over here, notice us. And you can imagine the rest of them going, shh. Now, we don't even know what that one was going to ask for, because all that person said was, Jesus, Rabbi, have pity on us. Maybe that person was going to ask for money, or maybe they were going to ask for food, or maybe they were going to ask for healing because they knew who Jesus was, or maybe they didn't. We don't know. And maybe Jesus had a pause after that one called out to him, because Jesus was a Jew, an observant Jew, and the religious leaders had rules about these people. And maybe he thought for a minute, you know, it's just my job to get these people to reconcile to their place in society and maybe wait patiently for liberation and treatment as full human beings until the rest of society just comes around. We know how that goes, right? Just wait your turn. As Dr. King said, justice delayed is justice denied. But that one person said no. That one person engaged, and Jesus had to do something. They broke the law. And so Jesus decided to break the law, because sometimes unjust laws must be broken in the service of freedom. Don't forget that we're talking about that in the year that Roe v. Wade was overturned. Jesus decided that engagement was required of him, and so he said, go show yourselves to the priests, to those people who think they have power to keep you in your place. And they headed out to do just that. Now, I can't imagine what they expected, because there were still 10 people with leprosy as far as they knew. And Jesus just said, go show yourselves to the priests, which, 10 people with leprosy going to see the religious leaders who told them they couldn't be part of society? I don't know what they were thinking at that point, but they went. They went. And one of them, a not us person, a Samaritan, I love to think about that. Oh gosh, I'm sorry. I go off on a rant and then I lose my place. As they were going, all 10 of them realized that they had been healed, that they had been made whole. Now, I love to think about that moment for these people, this defiant group of 10 people with leprosy who went to those priests who had denied them community, denied them respect, denied them their very humanity, and they showed themselves whole and healed. And then one of them, a not us person, a Samaritan, that one took the time to go back to Jesus and to give thanks to God for the healing and the wholeness. And this is before they got to that great moment with the religious leaders, right? This one realized he was healed, turned around, and had such a relationship with God that they just couldn't go off without giving thanks. Just that one. But oh, what joy for that one. And then all 10 of them show up to the priest, and I want to believe it was like, here, take this, we're back. And we have every right to be full members of society. Sort of a, we're here, we're queer, get over it moment, yeah? Sort of like a moment when a gay former Pentecostal preacher took a risk and said, okay, God, if you want me to start a church, I will. And invited people to his home, printed up bulletins, chose hymns, used an Episcopal prayer book, oh, they would have been scandalized, for the sacrament of communion, the Episcopalians, and assured those present that they were welcome and loved by God. Friends, those are our ancestors. We come from those amazing ancestors, from people who were told they weren't loved by God and knew better anyway. From people who doubted God's love and then found it. From people who dared to fight back against the police. From people who went to St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York to disrupt worship, to protest the Catholic Church's unwillingness to fight AIDS by distributing condoms. Those are our ancestors, my friends. We come from people who dared to take on corruption and disinformation. We come from people who only needed a few strong people joined together in a common purpose to change the world around them. Let us never forget that, as Margaret Mead said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. May we commit ourselves to being that group. Amen.